on how to identify causal mechanisms, as I said, and Ulman's example this morning was that we can pull out people from our longitudinal studies, do an intervention, and let them back in, right? So would you like to comment further on this approach, Ulman?
Yeah, sure. So I think that many of the countries we are doing research in actually have large epidemiological studies or large longitudinal studies. There is a SHARE study, which is at the European level. Here in Germany, we have the German Socioeconomic Panel. And I think what we often lack in our intervention studies is an answer to the question whether life trajectories really change. And one very attractive way of getting at this question is to recruit the people of our intervention studies from these large-scale panels. Then what we have is basically their life trajectories up to the point where we have recruited them into our intervention. And then after the intervention, they of course are still part of that panel. So then we can observe them over the years to come on the measures that are in the panel. But sometimes, for instance, in our case, we are at good terms with people from the socioeconomic panel. So then we even can convince them of adding some questions or some tests even to the panel so that we have some relevant outcome measures to observe them on in the future. And I think that speaks to the long-term effects of some of the interventions, and I think we really lack knowledge for the most part on these long-term effects.
Thank you. So you others, do you have comments on this approach, or is this the way you see forward?
Maybe I can just talk about a little bit about just what people have been telling me running studies at Charité, at university medicine before, and many people that participate in our studies actually want to be part of interventions. This is part of their motivation in research, and when they are, it happened to us that people are part in longitudinal studies and they actually cannot participate in other intervention programs. So participating in the longitudinal studies prohibited even people to take part in interventions that they really feel they would be needing to stop their cognitive decline. So I think this idea, that's something I take home from this meeting, that would be very, very helpful, for example, in studies like Delcode, that we recruit people that have actually subjective cognitive decline and mild cognitive impairment, and their need is that they want to participate in interventions eventually.
Thank you. The other advantage of that would be that the type of follow-up that would be possible is quite different from a circumscribed study that has been done at a certain place and then the people dissipate in the general population and you have a hard time following up. If there is a framework in which studies can take place, you of course get a much closer interaction with the people and a more long-term follow-up, which in theory could go back years after the original study has closed.
So Gaël, you are running intervention studies, and you recruit them to be in an intervention study. What are your plans for the long-term follow-up on this? Because regarding Ulman's comments on the lifespan or the long-term trajectories.
Yeah. So. There are several aspects there, because first they are involved in a clinical trial and they are randomized, so they cannot choose what they're going to do for the long-term intervention. It was 18 months. So that was an important aspect, because what motivated them is not that they wanted to meditate or they wanted to learn English. It's just that, and we really warned them very strongly about that, it's just that they want to participate to this study and make some scientific advances and be part of it. So I think that for real life, this is an important aspect to consider, because motivation will probably change a little bit the data, the results, and this would be an important factor to consider. We don't want to say to ask people to meditate or to learn English throughout their life if they don't like and don't want to do it, because they will probably have a longer life, but they will get bored about that because they don't want to do that. So I think it's a very important aspect, and we should be careful when telling people how to live longer, healthier, etc. Not to put too much pressure and culpabilize them, as it's good that they realize they can take part of taking care of themselves for later. But on the other hand, everyone should find the right way to do it and the way that make them happy and feel comfortable, etc. As for the longer term follow-up, it's a good question because especially for the intervention that lasts for 18 months, it means that for 18 months, people have been working as a group. They were seeing each other for every week, 2 hours. Many things happened in their life over 18 months. And they were very attached to each others, but also to the teachers and to the practice, actually. They practiced every day, sometimes 20, sometimes 1 hour per day, 20 minutes, 1 hour per day. So it's a big change if all of a sudden the study is over and we tell them just, okay, goodbye. So we struggle a little bit to know how we can, we were interested in how they would, by themselves, maybe continue practicing either English or meditation. On the other hand, if we wanted to study that, we should not influence them. So first we obtained the funding, or we're still ongoing obtaining the funding actually, to have a longer term follow-up. So we're going to see them 20 months after they have stopped the intervention or no intervention. And we told them that we cannot help them to continue learning English or meditating because otherwise we would influence them, but we're going to study what they're going to do. So for now, I can say that some of them continue seeing each other and practicing by themselves, so they find the energy, sometimes place where they could still meet, etc., to continue the intervention. But this is something we are very interested in, and we will, in a way, be able to study what happened after they stop the formal intervention, and how many of them will continue by themselves or as a group, etc.
I just want to add a little thing that we haven't maybe talked about it today a lot. In the Medit-Aging study or in the Santé study, we added or we put a lot of effort into a work package that is called lifestyle factors. So we not only assess how people will longitudinally do cognitive performance cognitively, but also maybe continue practicing their meditation or language learning, but we will also assess how that impacts on their everyday lifestyle activities like diet, physical activity, and other cognitive activities, because we were hoping that the intervention really will basically lead to a more beneficial lifestyle in their everyday lives. So that's something really important about this intervention.
Yeah, I just wanted to emphasize exactly the same point. I think we all seem to agree that interventions are not like a vaccine, that you get it once and then it protects whatever system the intervention is aiming at for the years to come. But for the effects of the intervention to be sustained, they have to become part of a lifestyle. And we had a similar experience. A few years ago at Gaël, we did a study on cognition where people were practicing 12 cognitive tasks for 100 days, and we had 100 younger adults and 100 older adults doing that. And then we thought we would simply stop the study. Actually, in that case, the study was not taking place at home, but at a certain location in the center of town. And then we were basically forced to keep that study site open for a considerable amount of time, because even though we didn't pay the older adults any longer, they just kept coming. And it had become part of their lives. Now, what I learned from this is that it's perhaps much better to actually do the training at home with a tablet or so, because then it can effectively become part of their daily lives. And I also agree that this can only happen in a way that is motivated and agentic. It cannot happen as something that the experts tell them to do. That is also something that Gerd was alluding to in his talk. It's kind of the curse of the expert. Whenever we think we know what is better for people and we tell them you should do this, this is probably the best recipe for failure. And when it is presented and also communicated as in a way that integrates with their lifestyles, then chances of making it sustainable are much higher.
I have a question to the experts. So we have identified these 7 factors which affect all the diseases positively this morning, and so then I thought the research should be done into getting people addicted to improve on these 7 factors. So is any research done in that way? So to try and get motivation to do this. I mean, the studies that I've listened to today are usually interventional studies. So you plan an intervention, but you don't know how. Usually, you don't know how well it's accepted and how sustainable it is in subjects.
You mean, are there studies assessing the motivation to do the... so we are assessing how much motivated they were before, during, and at the end of the intervention. And because as we said, we had no dropout, it has been pointed that our population should be very special, either the population or the teachers or the persons who are... So we also asked them why they came back. I think that we should be aware of the fact that we're in those kind of intervention study touching a very particular kind of population that is already very active and interested in making some scientific advances and etc. So I don't know how much there have been studies and maybe other persons from the panel assessing motivation, but I think that we should find a way to motivate more the more frail and needed persons, and for example those with very low social education levels, etc., because they need that more. But I think we don't do that very well for now, and we really need to make more specific effort for that, I think.
The question is also how much of this is actually motivation. There are many smokers who are very highly motivated to quit smoking and just can't do it, and people are often motivated to exercise and just don't do it. So there is a lot of constraints in life and a lot of other factors that one might have to influence, and to lose habits, to lose bad habits and to acquire new good habits is I think more than motivation only. Clearly motivation plays a role. If you're not motivated, you will not be successful, but there are so many other factors that I'm not so sure that just trying to turn that screw is really successful. That at the end, I think we have to understand what it means to lead a life that people consider themselves as fulfilling, as happy, as good, as high quality of life, and that from that state that they might achieve, they might also come into a trajectory that is beneficial, because all these things somehow are together, but at the same time they are highly individual. So what might be good for one person, so if we motivate everybody to do sports, there might be a couple of people who just don't benefit really from it. And to do a lot of good things for sleeping does not apply to some people who might have many problems but not sleeping problems. So it's not this one size fits all that might be the solution, and I have no real idea of how much of this is really motivation, but I would predict it's much more than that.
We have a question from the room, or comment.
I have more of a comment, but I think that pertaining to your question, I think my own research has shown it. I think your 100-day study was an example of that as well, and I think the Silva Santé study is another example of it. It depends on the teacher. And that's not just anecdotally, that I believe in the quality of the teacher, which is responsible for the motivation, but I think there are other domains of research where it has been shown, like educational research has shown that overall, apart from the individual level of performance of the pupils, it is the teacher that explains most variance in the performance then after several years of education. So it's not the type of school people go to, etc. It's the teacher. And I think in the intervention studies, it's the same. It's the quality of the teacher that will matter. And that's the thing that we can influence as researchers.
Just a comment.
Thank you. So, Amram.
Yeah,
Just-
so one comment from a maybe more clinical point of view. So one problem that we have faced when basically talking to GPs or insurance companies and so on is that all these lifestyle factors that are very important are actually not regarded as valid interventions, particularly by insurance companies. So when it comes to actually motivating individuals, maybe even thinking about, and that's a societal process that's very, that hasn't really started, thinking about communicating risk, for instance, for Alzheimer's disease, then the response that insurance companies will normally give you is that, well, there's nothing you can do about it. Why tell somebody at the age of 65 that this person, may have elevated risk of Alzheimer's disease when there is actually no medication available? So the availability of lifestyle interventions is basically not regarded as a valid intervention. So I think we are now thinking at a level where actually many components of the society and political decision making have not actually, linked into our thinking. So we have to also think at that level. And there, I think organizations such as the Brain Disorders Council are very important to actually push also along those lines. And I think there's also a very strong ethical debate then necessary about risk communication.
I just wanted to follow up on a point that Gerd Kempermann was making. First, and I fully agree about the teacher effect. Probably the entire early program on memory training of the Max Planck Institute for Human Development was pretty much an N=1 effect of one extremely good teacher. But what I wanted to say about what Gerd Kempermann said, that it's not a motivation problem. When you take the typical gym, their business model is that I think only like 30% of the people who have a card for the gym actually go. All the rest shows up the first 2 weeks after New Year's Eve when they form their intentions and then stop going. And I think one reason why they don't keep showing up is, for instance, because they don't follow a class. Now, what does it mean, following a class? It means that you make a contract with yourself in the sense, if I do not show up, then I lose my money for that particular day for which I have paid, whereas this thing that it's deducted from your account every month is something you forget after a while, perhaps. Or you have an appointment with a friend with whom you go to the gym, or with a personal trainer, and so on. So I think it's all about queuing structures. It's all about implementing goals, implementing some external aid in your environment that forces you to stick to your goals. And we have done quite a bit of cognitive experimental research showing that as people age, they more and more depend on the cues in their environment. So what you may call environmental support, what Gus Craig has called environmental support, you can also look at it as environmental dependency, in the sense that they are more driven by the cues that are present in their environment. So I think one goal for healthy aging is to produce yourself an environment, which you can actually do to a large extent, that actually is consistent with your goals and that just primes you to do the right things in a way that you don't have to think about it every single moment in time, but it's just what the environment offers to you. That may, for instance, be using stairs as long as you can still use stairs, or it may be all kinds of things in your daily life that make you do things that are good for you without you having to form an intention every time.
Just to add on that point, there is in the contemplative tradition and in other contexts, there is one way to express that is through the notion of inspiration. So also another way to motivate changes is not so much through motivation, but through being inspired by people around. So so the teacher can inspire you, and so this notion that you have a role model that could guide you and inspire you for change. And that's actually a very important factor in many of these contemplative traditions.
Yeah, maybe another aspect, because I fully agree about the importance of the teacher, as we said, that they are entertaining, encouraging, stimulating. Our control group had no teacher, and we also had 0% dropout. They all came back. So I think it is also important how they understand their intention, why they are doing that, and how they understand it is important for us and why that they come back, even if always they should know that they could stop whenever they want. So I think this is another aspect, their intention, their motivation to come, and the group, as I said. Like when we asked them the question specifically, the group aspect, the others, was also important. It was not present in the control group, but it was an important aspect in the intervention groups.
I will let the president of the Brain Council have the last comment, because we are set to finish this.
It seems to me that, I mean, all the aspects which we know from, I mean, learning processes seem to play a role. I mean, imitation learning, cognitive learning, maybe also conditional processes. All these things probably need to be taken into account, and the teacher aspect as well. So it looks like this is a very, after all, in the end, it will be a very personalized intervention strategy which is needed. Isn't that the case? I mean, we are talking about personalized medicine, and this is more and more relevant and important in treating patients. I mean, to look at the individual disease state and adapt the treatment, I mean, medication or whatever, but also for these lifestyle interventions, this may, in some instance, may play a role.
Thank you. I indeed think you're right on the personalized aspect here. So by this, I will thank the panel members, all of the consortium members, and all the speakers especially for coming, and thank you so much for being here.